All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. And before I get into this story, just in case you're wondering, no, I am not a Dodger fan. I am a Giants fan. However, I'm wearing this shirt because there's some of you that just don't think that I will wear a Dodger shirt. I'll wear whatever kind of shirt I want to wear. Anyways, let me get into this next story. Hopefully I can get it out to you guys by tomorrow, if not the following day, so that I can get back. For those of you that are wondering, the next story that I'm putting out is the one on Chato from Laverne called The Double Cross. Anyways, let me get to the story. So this story right here is about a case that was just recently charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of California, basically out of the FBI's field office in Fresno. And this story is a little different from the other stories that I usually put out for you guys, and that's exactly why I want to share it with you. I can't keep throwing curveballs. I got to change it up and throw you guys a slider every now and then. But anyways, like I said, this is not your typical Nuestra Familia Mexican Mafia type of story that usually involves the hypocrisy of somebody falling victim to cutthroat politics. This is not one of those type of stories, but it's still an interesting story. So this is more about the criminal aptitude that inmates are capable of and how they exploit their resources when they're in prison. This is a topic that's talked about a lot, that inmates that are locked up, that are in prison, have nothing but time to refine their criminal aptitude, to plot, scheme, and think about some of the crimes, the future crimes that they're going to be involved in. But this story in particular demonstrates the potential inmates are capable of when they're locked up and confined in spaces that are no bigger than concrete closets, and they have nothing but time to plan, plot, and scheme. I mean, if you think about it, prison actually provides the perfect haven for criminally motivated minds to concoct and devise some of the most innovative, clever, and resourceful schemes. Some of it's predicated on survival, and some of it's predicated on criminal machination, or the conviction to make money by any means necessary. Trying to devise different ways criminally to profit and generate money. Convicts, and I do mean real convicts, the ones that have been exposed to real prison, or the real prison experience, for the lack of a better term, and who have had at times to rely on their own sense of ingenuity to fashion weapons out of the most meager and scarcest of materials. And I'm not talking about level 1 and level 2 killers. I'm talking about those who have spent years incarcerated and who fit the real definition. Those that have spent time in the shoe, isolated, with other more real seasoned and advanced criminals. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. Prison is like a big university for criminals, or a big melting pot of criminal ideas that are shared and disseminated amongst each other. You go in with the criminal mentality, and over time, this gets enhanced and refined by those with more criminal experience. You'd be surprised to see what kind of weapons have been fashioned out of some of the most basic of materials. You guys have seen them all the time on Lockup and some of the other documentaries that are always coming out on MSNBC. Styrofoam cups, deodorant or shampoo containers, plastic eating utensils, paper, nylon string, soap, etc., etc. To simplify it, basically anything indurated enough to puncture or break human flesh can be used as a stabbing instrument. When someone's survival is hanging in the balance and they're backed into a corner, the possibilities are endless. But this story right here, it isn't about the survival of the fittest. It's about a Crip named Christopher Thomas, aka T-Money, and trust me, the name is befitting. From the Main Street Mafia Crips, orchestrated two criminal operations while he was incarcerated in Kern Valley State Prison. So from everything I've been able to gather, he allegedly conspired with 8 other people in a criminal tax fraud scheme that grew into a 550 million, that's right, million, or a $500 million tax fraud scheme. The information is still forthcoming because this case just barely broke a few weeks ago. But again, from what I've been able to gather, this case, it culminated over a 2-year span in what was originally said to be a wiretap investigation. So the wiretap investigation began when the Kern Valley State Prison's ISU, Investigation Services Unit, intercepted information about a major drug trafficking operation that was gaining fast traction. This boy was moving major weight. and he was orchestrating it from his cell right there in Kern Valley State Prison. T Money was identified as being the head of what's known as a drug trafficking operation, also known as a DTO. They claim he was responsible for the shipment of large quantities of methamphetamine to a number of different states. He wasn't doing this locally. He was doing this countrywide. Some of the states that were named in the criminal complaint were Hawaii, Maryland, California, New Jersey, and all points in between. As I said, T Money was housed in Kern Valley State Prison at the time when this operation was allegedly in effect. And according to court documents, he was assisted by family and close associates who helped him distribute over 100 pounds of methamphetamine to some of those locations. This in itself was a huge investigation. This operation was huge in itself. And when they stumbled across what T Money was doing, they thought that they had hit the jackpot. This was gold right here. This was going to make somebody's career. Those that were going to take responsibility for taking this guy down, they were going to get promoted. And you know how it goes within law enforcement. Those that are at the bottom rungs of that ladder, they don't get that recognition. The brass does. But at any event, they thought this was a huge investigation on its own merits. But then as the investigation went on, it got bigger than that. So apparently the investigation ramped up after the DEA identified T Money as a major supplier of methamphetamine for Hawaii. They caught wind of several jail-recorded phone calls that roused suspicion and led the ISU in Kern Valley State Prison to believe that he might have been involved in some type of criminal activity. And this is the thing. A lot of the times when people speak in code, they have a code devised with somebody else and they're talking to them on the phone, on a jail-recorded phone. You might be careful about not using sensitive words in the code that you're speaking, but if you're just jumbling a bunch of words together that make no sense, this is a telltale sign that you're speaking in code. It's a dead giveaway. And these are the type of things that gang intel officers or ISU look for. What good is it to devise an elaborate code with an intricate key, only to then rouse suspicion and get them to put some well-trained eyes on your communications? And trust me, once that door is open, they're gonna figure it out. They got some of the best decoders and encryptors in the world. Them cats have been known to break codes that were used back in the caveman days. But this is when they discovered that subsequent recorded conversations with T Money and his confederates resulted in a seizure in Oahu, Hawaii of more than 90 pounds of crystal methamphetamine. And like I said, this is when they thought that they hit the jackpot. A 90-pound bust, that's a good seizure right there. That right there is enough to make careers. That's the kind of seizure that is career changing. But these seizures then became the basis for the initiation of a wiretap investigation into multiple contraband cell phones at Kern Valley State Prison that T Money had in his possession. Again, this is another clear-cut example of how damaging contraband cell phones are in prison and how they're utilized as instruments to further a number of different criminal objectives. Everything from drug distribution, smuggling operations, facilitating hit lists, and furthering a multitude of criminal conspiracies. So as they started listening to more of these recorded conversations, the investigation revealed that T Money orchestrated the interstate shipment of more than 54 pounds of crystal methamphetamine. And this is another seizure, a different one from the one that happened in Oahu, Hawaii. Some of the states that were named in that criminal complaint included Oklahoma, Alabama, New Jersey, and several others. So according to the DEA agents that were involved in the case, that were involved in investigating the case, T Money sought the assistance of close associates and several other gang members from the Main Street Mafia Crips. And in addition to that, wiretap intercepts led to the seizure of an additional 40 pounds of crystal methamphetamine, over 14 pounds of fentanyl, 9.5 pounds of heroin, and 8.5 pounds of cocaine. This boy was doing it big. But not only that, there was another half pound of fentanyl that was smuggled into Kern Valley, allegedly at T Money's direction. And that half pound of fentanyl, that was going to be marketed on the main line in Kern Valley State Prison. Believe that. And the chances are there was probably going to be a lot of overdoses on that yard. Fentanyl is nothing to play with, especially when they had no real way of cutting it or knowing how much was safe to ingest. I've seen videos where people just have inhaled fentanyl and they pass out. That's nothing I would want to play with. So as T Money continued to engineer his criminal network from coast to coast, law enforcement apparently put their collective authorities together to dismantle his organization brick by brick. And T Money was a cold dude. He even had his mom and his wife on the payroll. And as a result, both of them were arrested and included as being part of the 8 who were also snatched up in Maryland. With all due respect to T Money, I'm not making light of the fact that they hemmed up some of his family or that some of his loved ones were arrested, because I definitely can relate to this, and it's a stressful situation. But I've talked about this before, and this is why. A lot of the times when we're involved in criminal activity and we need others to assist us, we often turn to those who we know we can trust, those who we know are not going to burn us. And in this day and age, it's not your boys or those who are referred to as your supposed brothers in crime. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of it. It's hard to trust anybody. You guys know that. There's probably 5 people that each of you can say that you trust on one hand. And that's just the way it is. I know there's a lot of people that proclaim to be, righteous and honorable individuals. And it's easy to claim that until they've been put in a situation where their life is hanging in the balance. It's all about self-preservation. When people are put in that situation, they're going to do whatever they got to do to get out of that situation. Believe that. That's just the reality of it. But when we're looking for those that we know or we feel we can really trust, we play it safe. We turn to those who are the closest, family. But there's some serious drawbacks that come with this. On one hand, you're probably safe when it comes to trusting family and your wife or a significant other. It's just hard to imagine that they would burn you, especially when they have an emotional connection to you or when it's your own flesh and blood. But the drawbacks are obvious. You're involving them in criminal activity and you're placing them in harm's way. If you go down, they go down. And it can be a disheartening and unsettling situation to see your loved ones, let alone your own mother or other relatives, paraded into the courtroom. I mean, sometimes if you're lucky, you might get arrested by cops that have no desire to indict or arrest your mom or your grandmother or other family members that they know are not really involved and who they know are just being used as facilitators of your crimes. They know that they're not really involved. So it's more of a moral call. But then again, you might not get lucky, as there's cops who don't care about using that kind of discretion. They arrest whoever's involved and they're not cutting no breaks. As far as they're concerned, they'll let the courts deal with it. It's also leverage that a lot of them like to use later on in the case. But these are things that we don't always think about. And again, these are the chances we sometimes take at the expense of being limited when it comes to those who we wholeheartedly trust. So T Money, he apparently started coordinating high levels of methamphetamine transactions to people across a number of different states. And his operation, it snowballed. It took off fast. He had high quality dope and he came in cutthroating the market. A short-term investment for long-term effects. But here's the thing. Some of these transactions were coordinated over contraband cell phones, using encrypted messages and other forms of covert communications, metaphors, or what's often been referred to as carnival talk. But there was a brief period of time when he didn't have access at contraband cell phones. Maybe they came through and they confiscated the cell phone that he had. Maybe he had to get rid of it. Maybe there wasn't no cell phones on the yard for sale. Whatever the case was, there was a brief time where he didn't have a contraband cell phone and he was forced to communicate by other means. And it was during this time that he actually used a state-issued tablet to facilitate these transactions at the expense of CDCR. For those of you that aren't familiar with what a state-issued tablet is, let me give you the short answer. I'm not sure about other states, but California now issues its inmates tablets as a means to communicate and to allow the inmates to engage in the social media craze. This allows them the ability to upload and download emails, to upload and download pictures of loved ones, and it also allows them to upload and download short video clips. However, there is some limitations, obviously. It's on a closed system that's managed and controlled by CDCR. They can't just surf the net or Google information like most of us can out here. They use their contraband cell phones for that. You'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't. But most inmates have the same social media accounts as everybody else. IG, Facebook, Cash App, Venmo, Kick, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, etc., etc. They pretty much stay up to speed and current with all that stuff. Most of them post daily on their social media accounts like everybody else does. None of this stuff was available when I was doing time. All this came years later. I believe tablets began getting phased in and distributed sometime officially in the summer of 2021. And in 2023, CDCR implemented drastic changes, which included making phone calls to family and friends free. They didn't have to pay for them anymore. Make no mistake about it. Prison is still a dreaded environment that I want no part of. I gave enough years of my life to those places. But these guys have it made compared to when I started doing time in the late 80s and early 90s. Phone calls at that time were close to $7 to $10 a piece. And trust me, over the course of a whole month, when you're doing a lot of cupcaking on the phone, the bills add up. It's easy to run up a bill that's close to paying a second rent or a ransom. I remember it used to get so burdensome for some of us that, we felt guilty about calling home, or we'd have to set a quota, call so many times during the month to keep the bill manageable, or we just wouldn't call at all. But I guess T-Money, he thought that his word game was complex enough to continue orchestrating his criminal activities with. And so that's what he did. He not only exploited the potential reach that inmates could achieve through the access of social media, but he also exploited CDCR by using their own state-issued tablets to accomplish his criminal activities. But don't we all think that we're smarter than the next guy? We all think that we're a step ahead of the game, that we're smarter, that we got it all figured out, and that we're on top of it. A lot of the times it's our own egos that blind us. And T-Money wasn't no different because his word game wasn't as good as he thought it was. So after several months of listening to his phone calls and going through some of the messages on his state-issued tablet, the prison's Investigative Services Unit, ISU, caught on and started deciphering his encrypted metaphors. And this led to them contacting the FBI's field office, the DEA, and the DOJ. They presented a lot of this information to one of the federal attorneys, and after that, it was a wrap. They secured the wiretap order, and they began an investigation that culminated into a lot more than just another methamphetamine drug trafficking operation. Like I said, in the beginning, they looked at that as, they had struck a gold mine. But this now looked like it was just a drop in the bucket. So T-Money, he was originally serving a life sentence for a murder. And with that said, it's probably safe to assume that when he got caught up with this case, it didn't faze him. If anything, he was probably more frazzled because of some of his family getting caught up. And of course, for the monumental financial losses that he would have to eat as a result of getting busted by the feds, or that his connections would have to eat. Not only that, but due to the fact that he was doing state time, the prospect of going to federal prison was probably considered an upgrade for him. You can ask anybody, 9 times out of 10, they would rather do federal time than state time. So he was probably looking forward to it. Going to federal prison from state prison is analogous to moving to the suburbs from the projects. But anyway, so as the investigation continued to gain traction, the FBI, the DEA, and the DOJ would later enlist the assistance of the IRS's Criminal Investigation Unit. And this was effectuated as soon as they realized that T-Money was orchestrating a bigger criminal conspiracy that involved a $500 billion enterprise tax fraud scheme. That's almost unbelievable. $500 billion. They say crime doesn't pay, but if you're going to get involved in criminal activity, probably with T-Money. Well, probably not, because he ended up getting busted. But those are the type of crimes you probably want to get involved in. They say crime doesn't pay, but $500 million, that's a tempting prospect. So again, as they were investigating the drug operation, they intercepted emails from T-Money and text messages about what appeared to be a massive tax fraud scheme. So the text messages that they intercepted contained information for many businesses with tax refund amounts. It basically revealed that T-Money himself was the one that was filing these tax returns. He filed payroll tax returns to the IRS that claimed employee retention credits, the ERCs, for businesses that were not entitled to receive those credits, so that they would then receive large tax returns. I know there's a lot of moving parts here. Some of you might not really be familiar with the IRS and how some of this stuff works, but If you guys remember, for those of you that had a real job, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the ERC became available as a refundable federal tax credit. It basically became available for employers as a way to encourage businesses to keep their employees on the payroll. This was the government trying to avoid a huge hike in unemployment, and they looked at it as a long-term investment. And again, as a way to avoid an escalation in unemployment. Give a little bit of money to save a little bit of money in the long term. But this credit was available to eligible employers that paid wages to some or all of its employees during the pandemic. Like I said, it was basically an incentive to keep them on the payroll. But here's the thing, getting involved in this type of criminal activity, it leaves a paper trail. Fraud schemes, writing bad checks, extortion, those type of things, you got to be real careful. And the IRS is somebody that you do not want to mess with. Trust me on that. So when the IRS got involved, they looked at the case, and their records reflected that T-Money and his confederates that claimed over $500 million in tax refund credits, and businesses that were defunct at the time that the payroll tax returns were filed. So once all this money started rolling in by the boatload, $500 million. Once all that money started rolling in, obviously T-Money started using that money for improper personal expenditures. One of the examples that they gave was like in December of 2022, T-Money allegedly celebrated his birthday by paying for his family and friends to be driven to Las Vegas from Los Angeles. While there, they enjoyed an extravagant party. He puts them up in a luxury penthouse suite for the night, and then the following day, he had them flown back to Los Angeles in a private jet. If he couldn't do it in class himself, he might as well let his family and friends do it for him. And that's what he did. These guys were doing it like high rollers. And get this, the law enforcement agencies that were involved in taking T-Money's operation down, they said that it was remarkable that a gang member that was serving life in a state prison that could orchestrate not just one, but two criminal schemes designed to make money for himself and his co-conspirators. I don't know why this came as any real surprise, considering what others had been able to accomplish in the past. But then again, they had to play it down by taking shots at his operation. I guess it was hard to admit that an inmate locked up in Kern Valley State Prison, that he was able to cross so many lines. But they said, unfortunately for T-Money and his co-conspirators, they ended up getting involved in the type of crimes that they have an extensive amount of experience investigating and prosecuting. In other words, they were saying he got involved in the wrong crimes because this is what they do. Like I said, again, egos are always going to be involved, especially when you're dealing with crimes of this magnitude. As far as I know, people have always found ways to swindle the government. Remember the stimulus checks? This is all reminiscent of what happened a few years ago when the IRS found out that inmates in prison were filing for the government-issued stimulus checks. Everybody was filing for them. And even though they eventually caught on, they had no recourse to stop it. They had a hard time tracking them because they were in the masses. If you guys remember, I ran a story on Salinas Valley State Prison when B Yard was supposedly moving the most dope in the state. Well, at least according to the NF's auditors. All the money that was circulating on that yard was the direct result of a huge influx of money that was derived from those stimulus checks. Everybody that I talked to at that time had filed for them or they were in the process of filing for them. It was free money. So according to law enforcement, T-Money is a validated gang member of the Main Street Mafia Crips. They say he was also convicted out of Los Angeles County for what was described as a gang-related murder and that he was given life. And again, CDCR has him validated as an active Crip gang member. He's on an active main line, not an SNY. I know it doesn't matter, but for you sticklers, those are the facts. So right before the authorities dropped the hammer on T-Money and his co-conspirators, they looked deeper at a lot of the communication that he made on his prison-issued tablet. Again, here's another sharp individual who's orchestrating his criminal activities using cell phones and social media, but then he drops the ball by not deleting the messages. Sound familiar? I just ran 2 or 3 stories about a month ago that were along these same lines. But in all fairness to him, I'm not even sure if deleting the messages would have even done him any good. Because from my understanding, when you send them emails or they send emails out, anything that comes in or goes out gets screened by the prison first. So this means that those emails are recorded somewhere closed circuit system. So using the tablet just probably wasn't a good idea all the way around. As far as I know, all their communications are monitored and they have to be approved or denied before they come in or go out. So this leaves a paper trail. But the thing that amazes me about this case is not just the amount of money that was involved, but it's the fact that T-Money was able to find legitimate businesses who were willing to allow him to file these retention tax credits on their behalf. That's crazy because this is obviously, it's taking a huge risk, exposing their businesses to criminal liability and the possibility of incurring huge financial penalties. You get caught and your business is getting swallowed up. Is it worth it? I don't think that's smart at all. I get the incentives and the possibility of making huge financial gains, but the risk clearly outweighs the benefits. And I'll tell you guys right now, you can bet your bottom dollar that the federal government would be more than happy to absorb these businesses for getting caught up in this type of fraudulent scheme. Man, they'll take your business without a second thought. $550 million is not a small feat by any comparison. That's a lot of money. Again, that's $500 million. Billion. You know, call me scary, call me whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But if I had a legitimate business, I wouldn't allow any type of criminal activity whatsoever to come anywhere near my business. Again, the prospect of a come up in the amount of tens of millions of dollars is tempting, and it's an attractive proposition, but I just don't think I would do it. That's just me though. Maybe it's because of all the years I've spent in prison and what I know now, or maybe it's because of all the criminal culpability that I've personally faced in the past. Whatever the case may be, I don't think this makes me scared. I think this makes me all the more wiser. In closing, T-Money's drug trafficking case and his tax fraud case are being tried separately. If convicted, he faces huge financial penalties and years in federal prison. He'll probably be in debt with the IRS on the installation program for the rest of his life. Again, this case right here just goes to show the potential and the sophistication that's possible by inmates who are locked up in concrete boxes and have nothing but time to bring their criminal aspirations to fruition. You know, they can lock people up physically by putting them in prison, but their minds and their mental abilities still remain free to pursue their criminal agendas. Besides feeding people drugs, they still haven't figured out a way to keep people locked up mentally. I'll give you guys updates on this case if anything noteworthy comes out in the near future, but this is probably just going to be a slam dunk. They're probably going to stretch him out in federal prison and hit him with financial penalties that he'll never be able to pay. Now, again, like I said earlier, I know this wasn't the typical kind of gang story that I usually put out for you guys, but this one should have still sparked some interest based on the complexity of the crimes and how all this was orchestrated. But don't trip, I got the kind of stories lined up for you guys that are all predicated on the things that you guys like to hear about. Power, greed, hypocrisy, drugs, money, and all the moving parts. Hits, short careers, and cutthroat prison politics, etc., etc., etc. So I previewed some of the thumbnails on stories that I'm currently working on, but if you didn't catch that story, here they are again. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think about this story. Like I recently told you guys, I'm currently working on a few Mexican Mafia stories right now as a multi-part story on the Aryan Brotherhood, its leadership, and the last indictment that they got hit with. I'm sure you guys are going to like them all, but the AB story is one that I'm investing a lot of time in. So stay tapped in for updates on when these are going to drop. As always, we appreciate the support. We appreciate you guys for tapping in. And most importantly of all, we appreciate the fact that so many of you have become loyal viewers. On that note there, this is your boy B, and I'm out.